Good afternoon or evening to all of you. I just wanted to talk today a little bit about the tax LLM and answer any questions you may have about the program. You can use chat, or if you want to raise your hand, we can do it orally, verbally, whatever you prefer. Okay, so let me just open up the slides. So you should see some slides there in front of you. So a little presentation about Queen Mary generally, but then more specifically about the law program at CCLS, and especially, of course, the Institute of Tax Law, seeing as you're all tax LLM offer holders. And then we'll do it in such a way as to leave time so that you will have time to ask questions if you would like. Okay, so QM is one of the world's leading universities as a research university and in general, and it's also one of the leading law programs in the world. The most recent QS worldwide rankings that came out recently have actually moved us to 30th, which is 2 spots over what we were in 2019. We've been slowly going up the rankings, so not only are we a top law program worldwide, but the trend is positive, which is always good. You don't want to be top but sort of stagnating or going down. We are in the top 10 research universities in the UK. We're a member of the Russell Group, which, as some of you may know, is the UK's leading organization for universities. So all the top universities are in the Russell Group, and we are there, unsurprisingly. We're one of the most international universities in the world. That's by measure of both staff and students, so either way you look at it, in terms of our research focuses as well, and so on. So by any sort of reasonable metric, we're one of the most international universities in the world. We have, apropos of that last point, we have students from, in any given year, from more than 100 countries and territories. And that in itself is quite unusual. And we have 2 additional locations, one in Paris. We have a strong and well-established LLM program in Paris, and we have a center for shipping law in Greece, and we also have joint programs with various institutions around the world, including in China and in Singapore, in Europe, and in the US, and hopefully soon in some other jurisdictions as well. In terms of law at CCLS in particular, the CCLS is the postgraduate, or some of you might say the graduate program, right? So it's the LLM and PhD program of the law school. It was established in 1980 by Sir Roy Good. So this is our anniversary, our 40th anniversary. It was supposed to be a great year, but for some reason that you might have heard of, that was interrupted by COVID. So all of our activities and so on have been taking place online. But we're a 40-year-old program, a very well-established one. We have the largest program in the UK and Europe by far. We have 18 LLM programs this coming year and more than 120 modules, students from all over the world. We don't get quite 100 different jurisdictions. I think in a typical year, probably about half of that, which is still very good. We're located in the heart of legal London. So we're just at the corner of Lincoln's Inn Fields, which is the sort of the center, the Chancery Lane, the Inns of Court, the Royal Courts of Justice, The old HMRC building, the old Center for Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs, as it happens, also not far away, although they've since moved. So we are in the heart of Legal London. We're also incidentally in the heart of the university area. So we have access to libraries of all of the University of London, for example. We have a large range of visiting lecturers and speakers. They come to London and they come to us because we are a center for academic and teaching excellence. So many of the modules, including many of the tax modules, benefit from practitioners and government officials, consultants, people who work in international organizations like the IMF, the OECD, and so on, coming to the program at Queen Mary. And finally, although probably not of great concern to you, at least at the moment, we also have a vibrant PhD program. So I've gone the wrong way on the slides. There we go. The LLM in tax law is the biggest and strongest program of its kind in the UK and one of the leading programs in the UK and Europe. We'll talk more about the specifics of our program in a few minutes. We also offer a postgraduate diploma in taxation, which is 120 credits, as opposed to the full 180 credits of the LLM program. Again, we'll talk a bit more about the details. The LLM program is part of the Institute of Tax Law. So the Institute of Tax Law covers the LLM program, but it also includes our research activities. It includes the PhD program, visiting scholars, visiting lecturers, and so on. So, and as part of the LLM program, you would be part of that as well, except obviously not directly on the PhD program, but the extent that PhD students give seminars and lectures, those are open to LLM students as well. So it's not just the tax LLM, it's also the broader tax activities that take place at CCLS. All of which are sort of alluded to in those bullet points. We have one of the interesting things about our tax LLM, we're just called the LLM in tax law. Some programs call them, use the word international in their title, but in effect we are very international and comparative in focus. This is both because the student body is very international. Typically, we have students from about 24 jurisdictions in any given year. And also, frankly, because the staff, the academic staff who teach on the program and our visiting lecturers and guest lecturers are also very international in background. So we have Brits. As you may be able to tell from my accent, I am not British originally, so I'm North American. We have North Americans, we have Europeans. So we've got quite a broad range in terms of that. And we cover a very broad range of jurisdictions, not only in terms of international taxation, in other words, OECD and UN model conventions, for example, but also specific jurisdictions. So the UK, of course, the European Union, the United States, China, India, other members of the BRICS, Brazil, and so on, and also other emerging and developing economies. So, and we in fact have a module specifically dedicated to that, which is quite unusual. We have a very practical focus, and by practical, I don't just mean for practitioners. We have students who go on or return to jobs as advisors, as practitioners, as consultants, as government officials, all sorts of different, some of them go into those positions new, some of them are returning to them. So you have quite a range of student backgrounds, so to speak. Some have come straight out of the LLB, out of an LLB or the equivalent in their home jurisdiction. Some have practiced from it, worked in some capacity for many years. So we have a very wide range, and we, both in terms of professional backgrounds and in terms of jurisdictional backgrounds, and we cater to all of that. Different modules to a greater or lesser extent, but certainly across the program, we cater to all of those. A little bit about the core modules. So we have, it's 100, the way the program is set up, it's 180 module, 180 credits, excuse me, to complete the LLM. 30 of those credits have to be a dissertation. So that leaves you with 150 taught credits. We will be offering next year 9 modules that you will be able to take to satisfy that 150 credits. Some of those are 30 credit modules, some of them are 15 credit modules, but you will have considerably more credit options than you need, so to speak. And in addition, as you may be aware, you're able to take some of your credits for next year. It'll be 60 credits in other modules. So although many of our, actually more than half of our students take only tax modules, when I say our, I mean obviously the tax LLM students take more than take all of their modules in tax, you have the option to choose from the other 110 or so modules up to 60 credits to sort of complete your 150 credits of top modules. And that's one of the strengths of the program. One of the things that we hear from students over and over again is that they wanted to do, let's say, for example, in our case, tax, but they were very happy that they could take 15 or 30 credits or whatever in a different specialism because they really wanted to have a grounding in banking and finance or commercial and corporate law, whatever it might be. So that's something to keep in mind. Not all of our competitors offer that as a possibility, and even the ones that do not have anywhere near our range of choice in terms of modules. So I want to give you the 8 main modules that we offer. So principles of taxation. This is a general module taken from a very multi-jurisdictional and comparative point of view that looks at individual and corporate direct taxation, right? So this one does not cover VAT at all. And it looks at how tax systems are structured, what the basic principles are, and so on. It's suitable both to tax and non-tax people, although it tends to have the tax people who are on it typically are ones who have not worked or do not have a strong, academic background in tax going into the LLM. So this is a good way to sort of come up to speed. We have 2 modules on international tax law. International in this context primarily means the OECD and UN model tax conventions and the tax treaty network of 3,000 plus treaties that comes out of that. Very important, particularly the first term of that sequence for anyone who wants to do anything with a cross-border sort of implication, because almost invariably tax treaties will come into the equation, so to speak. So it's very important to understand what those look like and why and how they interact with domestic law in your jurisdiction and so on. The 4th module, which I have to say I'm particularly proud of, and I'm biased because I'm the convener, but it is fairly unique. Very, very few institutions offer, at least in a law program, offer anything like it. It's tax system design and policy in emerging and developing economies. And it is basically what the module title suggests. So in this module, we look at the BRICS and the selection of other emerging and developing jurisdictions' approach to taxation, and also in general the issues that emerging and developing economies face in structuring, reforming,
evaluating their tax systems. Again, we look at direct taxation, but both individual and corporate. The flow of this module, this is true of all our modules, but particularly this one, really winds up depending on who's in the class. So, if someone from India or Thailand or Jamaica is in the class and is active, then the discussion sort of goes in that direction. And that's actually one of the things I love about this module, because it's different every year and I learn new things from my students every year. So that's the fourth one. And as I said, it's quite unusual in terms of what's offered at our among our competitors, so to speak. Then we have a module on U.S. international taxation, where we cover inbound and outbound. Again, I'm the module convener for this, so I could give myself a little advertisement on that. But again, it's fairly unusual because very few institutions outside the United States offer this as a full 30-credit full-term module. There are certainly institutions that offer executive sort of concentrated mini courses on U.S. taxation, but very few that offer it as a full academic module outside the United States, of course. And it focuses on inbound and outbound transactions, investment, both individual and corporate, obviously from the U.S. perspective. So the U.S. rules governing those types of transactions. We have EU tax law, which covers primarily the corporate tax regime. As you know, direct taxation, as you may know, direct taxation is not technically within the competence, or is not fully within the competence of the European Union, but there are a lot of rules, starting with the so-called four freedoms, that impact direct taxation. And this module does a very good job of explaining that, going through case law, and so on and so forth. We have a UK tax law module, also very strong, and we have which is the business tax and accounting aspects of taxation, primarily of businesses, but with some discussion of individual taxation as well. And then the transfer pricing module. Transfer pricing is one of the hot areas in taxation. It's a focus of many revenue authorities. It's likely to increasingly be the case, in part because cross-border transactions, although they are somewhat limited now because of the coronavirus crisis, that will come back sooner or later, but also because, and maybe even more so, because a lot of, if not most, revenue authorities around the world are under intense financial pressure. This was true, and countries around the world are under intense financial pressure. This was true before COVID. It's even more true now. And so one of the areas that many jurisdictions look to is how can you tax cross-border transactions, and transfer pricing is invariably implicated in that. A little bit on myself. So I'm the director of the LLM in tax law. I'm also the academic director of the Institute of Tax Law that I referred to previously. I am the convener for U.S. international taxation, for principles of taxation, which I co-teach with one of my colleagues, and also for tax system design and policy. My background is that I spent about 10 years in practice before giving it up to do a PhD and enter academia. I did my PhD on the development of the income tax system in China since the beginning of the reform and opening in 1979, 1980. And my research focuses and teaching focuses continue to be on Chinese taxation in part, also US tax law. I practiced for some time in the US, and more broadly on international and comparative taxation. And that's really what I wanted to say. So I see that there is a comment or / question from Ignacio. Hello. Good. I look forward to your contributing from Argentine tax law. That's something that I don't know too much about, unfortunately.
And so the UK module, I know, will discuss taxation of individual wealth. Principles of taxation does as well. And to some extent, so does the US international tax module, only in the cross-border context, because that's the scope of that, of that module. So I don't talk about the domestic, the strictly domestic part of the tax regime, except to give the background to the cross-border regime, which of course happens a lot because you can't understand a cross-border regime without understanding the regular domestic regime. But the domestic regime isn't the focus. The EU tax module, there, to the best of my knowledge, and I'm not an EU tax law expert by any means, but to the best of my knowledge, there isn't really much EU tax law as it regards individual wealth, except the one area that I'm aware of where the EU law has impacted the taxation of wealth is in the expatriation context, so that if you are leaving one EU jurisdiction for another, the four freedoms can be implicated in the question of a country's ability to tax the wealth, or the ongoing ability to tax the wealth of someone who's departing the jurisdiction. But I don't think there is really much more than that in that term, in that sense. Any other questions anyone has? You can, I think you can open up your mics and speak, or alternatively, we have a Q&A option here, if you want to raise questions that way. Anything else I can tell you either about the program in general or the specifics of any particular module? Okay, so Mikhail has asked, I noticed a lot of second semester courses have been canceled. So what has happened is that in order to accommodate, so we've changed the program a fair bit this year to deal, or to try to deal as best as we can with the situation arising out of the coronavirus crisis. So this means a couple of things primarily. First of all, we are now going to teach over 3 terms. So normally we would have only 2 teaching terms, and the third term, the summer term, would be for dissertations only, basically exams and dissertations and essays, right? So assessment and dissertation writing. But now that is going to be shifted. So we're going to have an actual third teaching term. And the 9 modules will be spread across the third teaching term. Now, when you say the second, I'm not sure what has been updated. I didn't look this morning to see if the list has been updated, but I can tell you what the structure will be. Give me 1 second. I will open the thing. But basically, the principles of taxation, U.S. international taxation, and EU tax law and tax system design and policy will all be offered in the first term, right? So that will be the September term, right? The autumn term. Then in the second term, we will have we'll have international tax law. We will have UK tax law, and we will have transfer pricing. And then in the last term, in the summer term, which will be an abbreviated term of, I think, 5 weeks, we'll have International Tax Law and Practice, which is the second sequence, the second module in that sequence, UK and UK tax avoidance. So those will be your options in the summer term. So that's the way it is expected to break out. You don't have to take all of them. Oh, and the other thing I should mention is that as I think you may have already been emailed, there will be a January intake. So you can choose to start in January. And if you choose to start in January, you can go either from January to the normal end date, which would be that you would be taking all your modules in what is now the spring and summer terms, and then do your dissertation and basically be done with your 180 credits. So you would end when you would have normally ended had you started in September. That would be quite intensive, I have to say. It's certainly doable, but it would be very intensive. Or you can start in January, but actually stay through to the autumn term. That's autumn of 2021, and effectively be done in December, and then your dissertation would be later as well. So you'll have two options there. So Bia's question, I think I've largely answered as well. It's a similar, I think it's basically the same question. So we will have 9 of these modules running between the autumn of this year and the summer of next year, 2021. We hope that by autumn of 2021, we will have the full range of modules, and that we will be back to the usual, the previous 2-term system. To be perfectly honest, nobody can tell you if that really will be the case or not. Yeah, so just to be specific in terms of the way Mikhail and Bia have asked the question, they're not technically being replaced, right? So none of the modules, some modules have been canceled, but other modules have been shifted, right? So they're not being replaced in that sense. It will simply be a smaller offering for 2021. Ignacio has asked about online courses. So at least for the coming term, the autumn term, and I suspect, to be honest, although we don't know yet, probably for the spring term as well, all the modules will be offered online. If you can come to London, if you're in a position to come to London and the rules here in the UK and that your, in your home jurisdiction permit, you will have face-to-face teaching. If you cannot, for whatever reason, come to London, you will be able to take any modules that we're offering online. That online online teaching will be a mix of synchronous, i.e. live, and asynchronous, i.e. recorded provision teaching. We are working out now what that's going to really mean in practice. So I can't tell you exactly what the proportions are going to be between those two, only that that's the way it will be done. So it will be online, it will be in person for those, or at least partially in person for those who can be here in London, and a mix of synchronous and asynchronous for everybody else. And a few things like perhaps some sessions will be recorded only, so it's possible that there will be a recorded element even for the in-person, the people who are actually in London. So I hope that answers that question, Ignacio. So 881, I don't have a name here, I have what I assume is a phone number, has asked, what's the relationship between tax law and corporate law? If you mean corporate tax law, then it's true that quite a bit of the module offering is focused more on corporate tax law. Not all of it. So principles of taxation, tax system design and policy, And US international taxation and UK tax law in particular have strong individual taxation components. But international tax law, for example, that two-module sequence is primarily about corporate taxation. The reason for that is, particularly in the case of international tax law, is that most of the work of the OECD and the UN, to a lesser extent, the UN is much less active, but certainly the OECD, and a lot of the academic writing is focused on corporate tax law, and therefore those modules are more heavily focused on those areas. Okay, so I hope if that's answered the question, then I hope that's answered the question. If not, please tell me in the Q&A section, and I'll come back to it because we still have a few minutes. What subjects do you have to take to qualify for CTA direct entry? Actually, I've recently looked into this, and there is no longer a direct path from the LLM into the CTA. Obviously, if you take UK tax law, that will help, because for those of you who are not familiar, the CTA is the Chartered Tax Advisor qualification in the UK. It is a very good, very strong qualification if you are interested in practicing in the UK. It is completely UK focused and largely, I have to say, domestically focused. To be honest, most of our tax students do not go for the CTA. Quite a few go for the ADIT exam, which is a very specifically international qualification, which is also offered by the Chartered Institute of Taxation. So I hope that answered that question. We're in the process of, if it hasn't already been done, correcting our web pages to reflect that that's no longer available, not because of us. That's change on the part of the Chartered Institute. Gig has asked a question, for online courses, if my country permits me to travel abroad, but I'm concerned, the answer is yes. You even if if your home jurisdiction allows travel abroad, but you're not comfortable with it for whatever personal health or family health or other reasons, yes, you can study online in the first term. That will be an option. We're not going to go check the regulations in your home jurisdiction and say, oh, well, they say you can come to London, so you have to come to London. That's not the way it's going to work. I suspect, well, let's say that it's possible that will continue into the second term, but it's hard to say at this point. Okay, any textbooks you recommend one must have? It's a good question. It's a question that often gets asked, and it's also a very difficult question to answer. And you probably will find the answer quite unsatisfying, so I apologize in advance for that. But the answer is basically no. And there are two reasons for it. One is that without having a more detailed conversation, there's a lot written on tax, a lot of very good material, some not so good, to be honest. And it tends to be very specific to a certain issue or sector or jurisdiction. We cover, depending on how you want to count it, dozens of those, right? We talk about specific sectors, we talk about jurisdictions, we talk about types of jurisdictions, so to speak, OECD members versus non-OECD members, emerging economies, developing economies, and so on and so forth. So there is not, there's no one single, I have a lot of trouble making a reading list, even, for specific modules, because we cover so many different things. So it's really quite difficult to recommend specific specific modules, specific textbooks, even for specific modules, let alone in general. Okay, another question has come up also from 881. What are the career opportunities open to tax law students? Again, a very good question, a very broad one, not an easy one to answer. Tax certainly opens up a lot of areas in professionally, whether it's in private practice or in consulting firms in the UK and perhaps in your jurisdiction. A lot of tax work is actually done in accounting firms or other non-law firm sort of contexts. Some people go into industry, right, into corporations, or into government, as I suggested earlier. Some people go back into those contexts, right? Into those sort of employment contexts. They've already worked, and they're being sent sometimes by their employer. They do the degree and then they go back. So there's a very broad range. Our alumni can be found in all of those. We have an active career development and support system, that helps students with that. Some students, of course, find jobs on their own, and of course, some, as I've said, go back to jobs they already had, or didn't leave to do the LLM. Some students stay in the UK. Most sooner or later do go back to their home jurisdiction. So you have a range in that sense, or sometimes to other jurisdictions, to third jurisdictions. So you have quite a range, of possibilities depending on your background, depending on what your options are at home, depending on what the tax profession looks like at home. The UK is in a somewhat unusual situation because it's quite fragmented. There are lawyers. The lawyers are divided into solicitors and barristers. There are a lot of accountants. There was reference to the CTA, the Chartered Tax Advisor. There are some people who are CTAs without being solicitors, barristers, or accountants, although most CTAs, I think at least today, are one of those as well, at least one of those as well. And then you have people who went into some other area or are in government. So the UK is a particularly fractured or scattered tax profession, but and I think most, from my experience, most jurisdictions not quite to the same extent, but I may be mistaken about that. Okay, so I hope that answers that question. Are there any others? I think officially we were told we have till about 1:45, but I'm happy to speak a bit longer. If there are any other questions, anyone have anything else they want to put through the Q&A, or if I haven't addressed fully the questions you had, I'm happy to revisit or to get more specific or correct myself. Well, let me just then give you one more piece of information if there are no other questions. Wait, so something come through. Yes, one more, okay. The credit requirements. Okay, so Michael is asking about the credit requirement. So it's 180 credits. 30 credits is the dissertation. That leaves you with 150 credits, so-called taught credits, which is to say actual modules. Of that, for next year, you will be able to take, you're allowed to take up to 60 credits outside of the specialism, which is to say non-tax. And just to be clear, by the way, the dissertation must be about tax, right? So it has to be, in order to be a tax LLM student, your dissertation has to be about tax. although we interpret that pretty broadly. So it could be, you know, tax and something else, right? That's something that you would discuss with your dissertation supervisor. You know, once you have a, you know, once you choose a topic, you get assigned a supervisor, and then you, you know, you would discuss that with him or her. So I think hopefully that answers that question. Let me know if there's anything else while I give you one more piece of information, which is that if you have any questions, you should feel free to email me or to tell any of your friends who may be considering coming to Queen Mary, to CCLS, that they can get in touch with me personally. My email address is s.b.schneider. Schneider is pronounced it's pronounced Schneider. It's spelled S-C-H-N-E-I-D-E-R at qmul.ac.uk. I see another question coming up, so I'll deal with that in a moment. Also, if you Google or, you know, whichever your favorite search engine, Baidu or DuckDuckGo or whatever, if you look for, if you search for Bernard Schneider CCLS tax or something like that, my name will come up. My email address is on my homepage. Okay, what is the main difference? Two more questions have come up. So what is the main difference between having 2 and 3 terms? So until this coming year, so including this year, normally we've had a 2-term, technically 3-term system, but only 2 teaching terms, right? So all the modules, or courses if you prefer, but the UK terminology is a module. The modules were all given either in the autumn term or the spring term. And then you had the summer term to write your essays, or at least finish writing your essays, sit your exams, and then complete your 30 credit dissertation and submit it, right? And then you would be done with your work effectively in most cases by the middle of August. We would do the marking, and then you'd have your degree by December. Because of coronavirus, because of the questions about whether people will be able to come to London in the autumn in particular, and so on, we are moving at least, well, at this point only for next year, to a 3-term system. We will offer only 9 modules, so that's a bit less than our normal offering. I believe it's still more than our competition, as far as I know, but it's a bit less than we've had historically. And those 9 modules will be spread out over 3 terms. 4 in the first term. So as I said before, but I'm happy to say it again. So in the autumn term, it will be principles of taxation, tax system design and policy in emerging and developing economies, US international taxation, and EU tax law. That is the autumn lineup, so to speak. The spring term lineup will be international tax law, UK tax law, and transfer pricing. Those are all 30 credit modules, by the way. And then the summer term will be international tax law and practice, which is the second part of the international tax law sequence. You don't have to take both of them, but if you want to take the second term, you must take the first term, because the second term builds on the first. And UK tax avoidance, which is a 15 credit module. So that's the breakdown for the summer term, right? So that's what the calendar will look like. So hopefully that has answered the question. Anonymous has asked, what is transfer pricing? So in short, transfer pricing is so transfer pricing is originally, let's start this way. Transfer pricing is originally a concept that comes from economics, which is the question of how do you price a good when it's sold between 2 entities within the same economic group. If I sell something to an unrelated third party, the market, at least in a market economy, the market sets the price, and typically the tax system respects that price, right? It's a real price. It's been validated by the market. I have no reason to give you a good deal. You have no reason to overpay me. And therefore, whatever price we set is considered a real price, so to speak. That breaks down if you and I are on an individual level, if we are related, or if we were good friends, but the tax system usually has no way to really check for that. And in the corporate context or the entity context, it breaks down if we are members of the same corporate group. And something like 2/3 of the trade in goods and services, I've seen estimates even higher, maybe 3/4 of the trade in goods and services around the world, this is at least pre-coronavirus statistics, was between entities within a corporate group, right? So I start the manufacture of something in China, the next stage is in Vietnam, it's then sold to Hong Kong. Hong Kong distributes it to 5 regional centers around the world, and those 5 regional centers then actually sell at retail or maybe even sub-distribute it, right? And all but the last step typically, or the last 2 steps, is happening within the same corporate group. Here we have a problem from a tax point of view, which is what should the so-called transfer price, the price to be charged for that good in this case or service, be? Because we don't trust the market price because there is no market price. Both entities are controlled, either one controls the other or both are controlled by a third entity, which is also within the corporate group, and therefore the price is potentially artificial and it's subject to manipulation. You have within the group the temptation to raise the profits, increase the profits, which is to say raise the price in the jurisdiction in which the tax rate is lower, right? That's transfer pricing. I mean, that, you know, that's the 2-minute summary of, or 3-minute, however long I took, summary of transfer pricing. That's what transfer pricing is about. Given the fact that 2/3 or 3/4 of global trade is between these kinds of entities, that's in value, by the way, not necessarily in volume, but just to be clear. And given the desperate need of most jurisdictions for money, right? Everyone's broke now, particularly with coronavirus. This is it's conceptually an important issue. It's an interesting issue. And it is increasingly a very important issue in practice for governments, if you're going into government or returning to government practice, for corporations, you know, and other entity taxpayers as well. So that's TP in a nutshell. I've just done it in 3 or 4 minutes, whatever it's been. But in fact, we spend a whole term on it. We could easily spend 2 terms on it, actually, to be honest. So I hope that answers that question. Okay, it's 2 minutes to 11. I think we've answered all the questions here. I hope that that's been useful. As I say, if you have any other questions or any of your friends have any other questions, I am more than happy to, I see some things have come up on chat. Yes, so yes, just a quick reminder that the tax taster class will also be at this time, which is to say 10 o'clock BST, British Standard Time, so the same time wherever you are, unless you're planning to go somewhere between now and next week into a different time zone. And I'll give you a sort of a mini class, which will hopefully give you a taste of what one of our classes, or at least one of my classes, actually looks and sounds and feels like. In the interim or thereafter, feel free to reach me by email. I hope this has been helpful, and good luck, and I hope that we will see you this coming September or January. Oh, I see one more Q&A very quickly. Groups that, I mean, companies that trade in related industries or parent company. I mean parent companies, multinational groups, just to be clear. That was a specific question about TP. So trading within a corporate group, within a group of entities that are related by ownership or control. Okay, so I hope that's been interesting, useful, and helpful. And I hope I will see you next week, and also at Queen Mary. Take care. Bye.